The ascent of Mount Everest has undergone tremendous change since it was first attempted by humans in 1953. Hundreds of mountaineers are able to complete the feat each year thanks to the advances in knowledge, technology, and substantial infrastructure provided by commercially guided expeditions that offer a veritable highway up the mountain for those willing to accept both the risks and a hefty price tag. But what exactly is at the summit? At the peak of the Himalayan mountain range, Mount Everest, also referred to in Nepali as Sagarmatha and in Tibetan as Chomolungma, crosses the border between Nepal and Tibet. The mountain is quite close to the equator and is located at a latitude of about 28 degrees, which is the same as Tampa, Florida, despite the fact that climbing to the top of the world is a difficult and potentially deadly endeavor due to the extreme altitude, avalanche, icefalls, and other hazards. Earth experts claim that by geological standards, Everest is only 50 to 60 million years old. When the Indian and Eurasian tectonic plates collided, an upward force propelled the rocks upward, creating the tallest mountain on Earth. Now, that force is still at work, raising the summit of Everest by nearly a quarter inch per year. Isn't that incredible? Such a summit is undoubtedly dangerous to climb. But what dangers exactly exist? The air pressure on Everest Peak, which is 29,032 feet above sea level, is roughly one-third that at sea level, which drastically affects a climber's capacity to breathe in enough oxygen. Because of this, researchers have shown that the human body cannot survive over 19,000 feet for an extended period of time. A number of illnesses, such as pulmonary edema, cerebral edema, and blood embolisms, are more likely to affect climbers as they ascend further up the mountain and their oxygen consumption decreases. At such an altitude, the heart must work harder to circulate blood around the body, carrying oxygen, increasing the risk of frostbite. Priority is given to the vital organs, the digits come last. Most climbers ascend Everest with oxygen tanks to lessen the effects of the extremely high altitude. However, using bottled oxygen has risks and disadvantages of its own. To begin with, it is costly, cumbersome to transport, and empty cylinders are commonly dumped as trash. In addition, breathing gas only raises the relative oxygen to a level that is roughly equivalent to that of base camp, and if it runs out on summit day, the body might not be able to adjust to the sudden lack of oxygen. Last but not least, oxygen units are infamously unreliable, as Everest guide Adrian Ballinger learned in 2018 on summit day when his team suffered a systemic breakdown of their breathing apparatus. Now, you might have developed some interest in climbing, right? So let's discuss how you can reach the summit. Despite the fact that 17 distinct routes have been established to the peak of Everest, only one of the two are used by the majority of climbers. The Southeast Ridge, established in 1953 by Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary, extends from Nepal. The North Ridge is where George Mallory vanished from Tibet in 1924, years before a Chinese team ultimately finished the climb in 1960. Although seasoned mountaineers claim that the two routes' overall difficulty is equivalent, they provide different challenges. Mountaineers must sprint past the perilous Khumbu icefall on the Southeast Ridge, although it is a somewhat shorter summit day and easier to descend rapidly in an emergency. Jeeps can be driven all the way to the base camp on North Ridge, but climbers must travel many kilometers over terrain that is higher than 27,000 feet to reach the summit. In the 1990s, when international guides pioneered commercial treks up the mountain, Mount Everest's appeal skyrocketed. Notwithstanding the dangers, Everest annually attracts hundreds of mountain climbers from around the globe to its slopes. 408 Everest climbing permits were issued in 2021, which is a record for the Nepal Ministry of Tourism. Everest is a major source of revenue for the government of Nepal and regional logistics firms. Depending on the degree of service and the experience of the outfitter, a typical position on a commercial team can cost anywhere between $40,000 and $100,000. The amount of permit fees collected in 2018 was $5.2 million, according to the Tourism Ministry. A small group of skilled Nepalese guides who labor together each spring to prepare the route with fixed ropes and ladders, fill each camp with necessities like tents, stoves, bottled oxygen, and food, and then patiently coach their foreign clients up to the summit constitute the foundation of the enterprise. Although historically, expeditions used the Sherpas, a Tibetan tribe that lives closest to the mountain, to carry loads of supplies up, today a variety of ethnic groups work on the mountain, giving rise to the less endearing term high-altitude mountain worker. The average Everest expedition lasts 3 to 4 months, and most climbers make between $2,500 and $5,000. In recent years, Nepali guides have started to get training and certification to international standards courtesy of educational institutions like the Khumbu Climbing Center. To this point, you might be wondering, how long is this expedition? The second half of May is traditionally when the weather is ideal for climbing Everest, but preparations for a successful ascent start months before. The majority of teams gather in Kathmandu in late March to start acclimatizing. As they make their way to base camp, their high-altitude workers and base camp support crew are already on the mountain, hauling supplies and clearing the path to the summit. While the first teams of Nepali guides reach the summit in April, climbers make a number of overnight excursions, referred to as rotations in Everest lingo, to progressively higher camps up the mountain to adjust. Teams aim to have many kilometers of fixed ropes extending from base camp to the summit, as well as a number of well-stocked camps erected by the second week of May. The summit push typically takes place over a taxing 4 to 5 days round journey from base camp after a last rest. Some teams will even decamp the mountain entirely to spend a few nights at lower elevation for optimal recovery. If all goes according to plan, the majority of Everest climbers summit the peak by the 1st of June and depart for home. The Himalayan database states that over 300 people are known to have perished while scaling Everest. In other words, if you attempt to climb Everest, you have a 1 in 100 chance of passing away along the route. The overall death rate, which is calculated as the number of fatalities divided by the total number of climbers, not just those who reach the summit, is roughly 1.2%. Statistically, Everest is becoming safer primarily due to better gear, weather forecasting, and more people climbing with commercial operations, says respected Everest chronicler Alan Arnett. From 1923 to 1999, 170 people died on Everest with 1,169 summits, or 14.5%. But the deaths drastically declined from 2000 to 2018, with 7,990 summits and 123 deaths, or 1.5%. Now comes the real question: what exactly is at the summit? The mountain's real summit is a tiny snow dome structure roughly the size of a dining room table. There is space for about 6 climbers to stand and take in the scenery, yet on busy days, mountaineers must rotate to generally stand at the top of the world. To put it another way, the mountain summit is actually the highest point that can be reached on foot, even if it is quite modest. The vista is magnificent, and the more you take in its beauty, the more it seems like it belongs somewhere else entirely. Life on Earth appears to be small at such a height. 470 million years ago, the seafloor was where Mount Everest now stands. That's right. The gray limestone that makes up Mount Everest's summit pyramid, or highest point, was laid down on the northern continental shelf of northern India during the early to middle Ordovician period of the Paleozoic era, long before India began moving northward towards Eurasia and the eventual collision of tectonic plates that uplifted the Himalaya and Tibetan Plateau. The top rocks are referred to as Komolangma limestone by geologists. They are limestone or grainstone that is well bedded and has fragments of trilobites, brachiopods, ostracods, and crinoids, as well as other typical Ordovician marine invertebrate shells. It is a low-grade metamorphic rock because the Komolangma limestone endured the same heat, pressure, and fluid changes as the original limestone. These rocks have reached to the top of the planet as a result of fault displacement along the South Tibetan Detachment, continuous uplift brought on by the collision of India and Eurasia, which is still taking place today, extensive erosion of the greater Himalaya, and tectonic placement of the summit rocks over lower-grade metamorphic rocks. Now, the last but not least question is whether there's anything left to explore on Everest. In 2004, a group of tough Russians successfully climbed the mountain's last new route. While all 3 of Everest's main faces and ridges have been scaled, there are still a number of exciting difficulties that aspiring climbers can take on, such as the unclimbed Fantasy Ridge and the daring Horseshoe Traverse that connects Everest with its 2 neighboring peaks, Lhotse and Nuptse. Everest is in many ways still a blank canvas, says alpinist and National Geographic photographer Corey Richards. It's still as high, cold, and formidable as it ever was. How one chooses to climb it is as much a reflection of creativity as skill. There's always a new way to approach something, and Everest is no different. So this was a journey to the highest point on our green planet Earth. I hope you enjoyed the visit. please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss any amazing videos that we upload.